Hey, what's up, everyone? Can you believe we're in our final week of the Power Platform AI Global Hack? My name is April Dunham, and we're here with you for another session. So this session today that we have for you is all about GitHub. So you might know if you've been involved in the Power Platform community for a while, we have something called Sharing is Caring. So this is kind of like a Power Platform first-time contributor session that we're going to have today about how to add your projects to GitHub. Now, first thing I want to get out of the way is it is not required to put your projects on GitHub for the hackathon. You can submit those and upload your solutions anywhere in your video, and all of that's outlined in the rules. This is kind of an extra step that we wanted to show that if you did build something really cool that you want to share with the community so that other people can take advantage of the solution that you build as part of the hackathon, we do have a Power Platform samples repository that is on GitHub that you can share your samples so everyone can benefit from. So this is if you want to take that extra step, not required, and get plugged into adding your samples there to our Power Platform GitHub repository. Now, I'm not going to be doing this alone. We're going to be joined today by David Warner, program manager for the community here in Power Platform. He hosts all these Sharing is Caring sessions. He does the community calls. If you've been involved in the Power Platform community calls, then you know his face and you know his voice really well. So let's bring David Warner on, and he's going to be walking us through a lot of what we're covering today. Hey, David, how are you?
Yo, how are you, April? Thanks for having me on today.
I'm great. Happy to have you here. So you host, I think, a lot of these sessions, right? These Power Platform first-time contributor sessions, kind of walking people through GitHub. So can you kind of tell us what we'll be covering today in this?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those that are unfamiliar, Sharing is Caring is a program we started to provide hands-on guidance. Now today it's a little different. We're going to kind of just be talking one way. You're more than welcome to follow along from home, but we will have an opportunity for you to join a live hands-on session later in the future that we'll be able to work together hand in hand, ask questions, interact with one another. But today we're just going to walk you through. We're going to record it so you could always watch it later. But these are great because we're trying to provide you the confidence and the comfortability of being able to tackle things like GitHub, submitting a pull request. What is a pull request? So I'm excited today. We're going to take a look first at the sample gallery. What does it mean? What is their sample gallery live at the adoption site for Microsoft? We're going to start doing a little bit of a tour of GitHub, start explaining some of those weird terms like fork, pull request, what is a branch, all those kinds of things that may seem a little bit confusing. And then we're going to actually go through the process of contributing a Power App to GitHub. And we'll walk all the way through that process today, and we'll leave everyone feeling comfortable and confident and ready to contribute. And then we'll talk about some next steps after that. So you ready to go?
I'm ready. I mean, and again, this doesn't require or doesn't assume any knowledge of GitHub, right? So if like we've never heard of GitHub, then this is like a good session for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I just picked up GitHub this morning, never opened it in my life. So we're in a good spot. Yes.
Yeah, and you
But
mentioned like confidence and comfortability, right? It's like that's the way this is about. So like I can imagine that a lot of people are thinking like maybe it's not my place to contribute.
yeah, absolutely. You get that a lot because you're thinking, okay, these samples are going to be shared out with the entire world. We are a global community, so they're going to be shared out to the entire world. They're going to be shown on community calls. We're going to thank people. Hopefully, people will register for the recognition program, so they'll receive badges for what they're doing. And so it feels like, whoa, is it my place to contribute? It absolutely is. These are absolutely meant to be utilized in ways that people can learn. So the most basic of information and the most basic of sample, showcasing simple sample features and functionality is really great. We have new people moving into the technologies all the time, and being able to share that knowledge and share and then collaborate. You might find another sample that you like or one that you're looking for help with, then you could request that. So whenever you think, well, it's not my place to contribute, turn that thought off. It absolutely is everyone's place to contribute, and we're here to work together at doing that.
Exactly. Like even if you think like, well, what I built in a hackathon isn't anything super in depth or complex, there's someone out there that can benefit from what you're building and what you're sharing. So don't let that stop you for sure.
Yeah, and the great thing is that you're able to continue to do it, and you're getting ready to cover some requirements. So don't think that contributing is just during the hackathon period. It is forever. You can do it forever.
Exactly. So everything that you're doing right now, this is an ongoing thing. I'm sure this is just the inspiration that you're having there to like want you to do more and more. So as you do more, the community is always there, and the sample repos and everything is always there for you to be able to share. Now, we do have some requirements though. So some things that I do want to make sure to talk you through before we dive into GitHub and how to get started with all that for how to kind of format your Power Platform sample that you want to share. So first things first is you want to put all of your assets. So whether you're building a complex solution that has maybe a Canvas app, a model-driven Power App, maybe there's a Power Automate workflow involved or Power Virtual Agents, whatever those components are, you want to package those all up in a solution. And that's how we're going to share those with the community in the repo. Then we want to make sure that every time we're packaging something as a solution, there's something in there called the solution checker. So that just gives you an ability to run through and kind of give a report about your solution to make sure there's no dependencies or anything wrong with the solution itself, so that you can feel comfortable sharing that. And then it's just a matter of submitting that to the repo. And we actually have some guidance out there. If you go to the Power Platform Samples repo, there's a short link there where it shows you all the steps needed to be able to get your sample formatted in the right way and all the stuff that you need to do and the different steps so that we can process that and get that out in the repo for everyone to see. So with those logistics out of the way, I think it's a good time to just go in and show us the magic of GitHub and how that works.
Yeah, let's dive right in. Okay, well, first we're going to abstract up a little bit and talk about some of the benefits you get by contributing. Where do these samples go? Where do they live? Well, we know they live in GitHub, but they actually bubble up to a much higher level than that. And that's what I'm kind of showing right now. When you go to adoption.microsoft.com and you click on solutions, you're going to find that there's a little link here called the sample solution gallery. All of the Microsoft samples throughout the stack, whether it's M365 Modern Work, whether it's Power Platform, whether it's list formatting, they all get bubbled up to a single sample solution gallery. Now, it's got a few cool features that you're going to benefit by as a contributor. First, you're going to be able to show up. All these samples are gathered together and aggregated together. We can absolutely filter them. So we'll do that here in a moment. You see things like Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Effects. Obviously, there's still plenty of space for Power Pages, PDA. So if you've got something out there, don't hesitate to submit it and get with us. But you've also got all the other things. And a lot of these samples provide better together scenarios, which is really kind of the best use of the technology. No one ever really typically in a full-blown organization uses only one of these perpetually and forever. They're usually best when used together. And these samples will showcase that. So sometimes you'll see some of these samples crossing the technology overlapping circles, which is a fantastic thing. But first, let's filter down to just kind of the Power Platform. That's what we're focusing on today. And you'll notice that as I go in, I can sort by older to newer, newest to oldest. We see some pretty cool things. You're able to identify who created it, when it was modified. In fact, we just see one that was added today by April, so that's exciting, and other benefits as well. Now, the cool thing, though, is as you see, individuals are called out for the samples that they're making. What that comes with is your own little profile page. So here, if I bring up April, we can see that it aggregates all the solutions that she's contributed to the various community GitHub repositories, or repos, as they're shortened. And you're able to see all that she's done. And this is available for anybody. The first time you contribute a sample, you are going to get your own dedicated page that you can show off, because we know that as you're working in this industry, you want to show that to your manager that you're making a difference, or you want to show to your clients that you're making a difference. This is a great way to showcase all of the samples that you've contributed because they're aggregated. And again, they're aggregated across the technology stacks. So here we've got April doing things like Power Platform. We've got April doing things like list formatting, and they're all brought together in one nice, neat little space. It shows your information, so make sure you have your GitHub profile filled out because it captures all that information, and you're able to kind of showcase where else you're doing amazing things in the community. So that's just a small little view of where these all funnel up to. It's a great opportunity to showcase what you're doing. It's a great opportunity to share with others, give them one-stop shop to go find a ton of samples that are available. But that's the end result. How do you get there? So that's what we're going to begin and go through today. The first thing is understanding where you go in GitHub. So the place that you want to go to submit your samples is the github.com/pnp/Power Platform-samples. Now we've got other Power Platform repos. Those are being consolidated into this one singular location. So if you see those in the future, know that those are going to be retired soon. This is the one-stop shop that we're looking for. So this is how you contribute. This is your first stop to a contribution. Now, what we're going to contribute today is a sample Power App. And I've got some folders and files here. If I go into my sample Power App, I've got a calendar component here that we're going to submit. So the question is, how do I get these files, this source code and solution and README and assets like April talked about, how do I get these up into GitHub? Well, that's what we're going to go through today. And it's not as scary as you might think. I understand when you first come to GitHub and you see this interface, it can be frustrating and confusing. It uses a lot of terms like fork, star, branches, as we see here. You see things called main and tags. What do all these things mean? Don't worry, we're going to walk through it together today. The first thing that you want to realize is that when we come to a repository or a repo like this, we don't have any rights to edit it. As a community contributor, I'm using an account here that has no administrative rights. So how do I get my files up into this repo or repository when I've got no administrative rights? That's the first thing to understand is, where do our files go if we want to contribute? That's where that first term fork comes into play. We see it right here. It's labeled here for us in GitHub. One thing to keep in mind too is GitHub is always improving. Sometimes these buttons move around or they shift the functionality. So don't be afraid if you walk through this and then a couple of months later you're seeing things shift around or change a little bit. Usually GitHub is making improvements, but it's not too hard to figure out what they've done. And of course, we've got the sharing is caring sessions that you can join in the future that'll walk you through it as well. But for us today, right now, our first step is understanding that if we want to go put those Power App files up into GitHub, how do we do it? Well, the first thing is forking. What does forking mean? It just means that you're making a copy of this entire repository into your own account. So we see up in the upper left, I am in the PNP repo account right here. I don't have administrative rights, so I need to be able to go somewhere that does give me administrative rights. Well, where do I have administrative rights? My own account. So what forking does is it simply allows us to make a copy. And you'll notice that when I hover over that, I get a little tooltip that says fork your own copy of PNP Power Platform samples. What does that mean? It just means I'm going to make a copy of it in my own account. And now that I have a copy of it in my own account, once we go through that, then I can add files to it, and I can do things like branching, which we'll talk about. So the first step is that I'm going to click on fork, and it's going to take me to a page. I've never forked this before. I've never made a copy of it before. If you have made a copy of it before, it's going to give you a different page, and we'll actually show that to you in the end. But for now, we're going to assume that no one has forked this. We're all brand new to GitHub. We're brand new. This is going to be our first contribution, and you can see that it's telling me, okay, what is the owner? All right, so yes, I want that's the account I'm using. I can do a custom repository name in my own account, but I'm going to leave it the same. That's usually best practice. If I've already used it, then I could always rename it somewhere else, as you see right there, but it's telling me it's available. And then there's one other setting that GitHub does by default that I think is a little bit of a disservice. This little checkbox right here says copy the main branch only. Well, oftentimes there are development branches within repositories, and you may think, well, wait, what is a branch? We haven't covered that. We'll cover it in a moment, but just think of it as another copy. And so if we're only getting the main branch, that could be a problem if there's additional branches that we need to access. So I'm actually going to uncheck that. So that way, if I'm getting additional branches or, again, copies, then I've got access to all of them that are part of the original repo. So now we're looking good. I know the account I want it to go to. I know the repository name. I'm going to click Create Fork. Tells me it's creating. It gives me a nice little animation that it is forking it, and it's telling me where. It should only take a few seconds. And now, bam, I am in my own account with a copy or fork of that original repo. How do I know? Let's take a look around. We first go look at the URL. I see I'm in my account. I can see that up in the breadcrumbs right here. I can even see it right here. I've got my own little logo here for my account, and it even says forked from. So now I know that I'm inside of this account, and it's in my account, so I can actually now make changes to this. One quick way to actually be able to tell, notice that settings button right there. If you're in an account that you don't have any administrative rights to, You'll never see that. So that may be the first thing that people say is, well, how do I know I'm not going to accidentally mess up production? How do I know I'm not accidentally sending my files to production before they've been approved by the administrators? Don't worry, you can't do it. If you don't have administrative rights in a particular account or repo, you're not going to be able to make changes. And so when you see this settings, that's a good indicator that you're an administrator in that particular repository, whether it be your account or some other repository. Okay, so now we know that. We've tackled that. We know what a fork is. We're not even hungry, but we know what a fork is, right? So we're good to go. Next thing we're going to discuss is branches. And that is what this little drop down is right here. In fact, we even see 4 branches are existing. We're on the main branch, which in many cases within an organization is where we're going to want to send our files to when we do what's called a pull request. But for now, one of the best practices in contributing to open source communities is to create a branch. So you may say, well, wait a second, I already made a copy of the repo in my own account. What is a branch and why is it now necessary? Well, a branch is really nothing more than a copy of a copy. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another copy of this main branch. We see we're on this main branch. We can tell that by the little checkbox. Now, inside of our own account, we're going to make another copy of that. Why? We're already in our account. Why do we need to make a copy of main? Technically, you don't have to, but it's best practice for a variety of reasons. We're not going to cover all the reasons today, but one of the most beneficial reasons to make a copy of a copy is that if you mess up, you can actually just delete your branch. Some organizations and some open source repositories require you to create a copy of the main branch or the submission branch. Not all do, but it is best practice and it does give you a little bit more wiggle room. So if you were to use main as the branch to submit your files here and you make a mistake, well, then you have to refork to get it all the way back to the beginning. But when you create a branch, one of the nice things is if you make a mistake and add the wrong files or delete files accidentally, you just delete the branch, make another branch, and you're back at the start of where you want to be for your contribution. So when you think of fork, it's a copy of the repository. Once you're in that fork, which is your own little personal nirvana or your own little island in the sea to do what you want with, then you can then make another copy of that, right? So, and that's what a branch is. It's just a copy of a copy. So we're going to do that. We're going to do that right now. What I'm going to do is you'll see it even says for us, find or create a branch. Now, GitHub has a lot of features that don't necessarily make a lot of UI sense. It is not always necessarily obvious. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a branch here for myself, and I'm going to say sharing is caring calendar component, right? Now you'll notice it says a couple of things. It says create branch. That looks great. I've using my name. It even says from main, right? So we're good to go. All that makes sense. I don't see a button to click to create that branch. Well, this is one of those GitHubisms. You'll notice that when I take my cursor off of that window, it turns into the little arrow. When I move it onto it, we see that it becomes the little hand pointer, which is indicative of it being a button. Not obvious. One of the few things in GitHub that happens that you're like, I don't know that that would have been completely obvious to me, but now you know. So you're creating a branch. So I'm going to click that. And what it's going to do is now it's going to tell me, again, helping me out, branch created. All right, excellent. You'll notice that when I click on this, I see the little sharing is caring label, mostly, a little bit truncated at the end. But what I don't see is I don't see it in the list here. So what happened? Did it break? Well, sometimes GitHub has a few bugs, and this is one of those that we've noticed in the past. So it doesn't happen to everyone, but when you create your branch, if you're not already pre-selected on it, I've even seen it where sometimes it creates a little unique number there that makes 0 sense. Just refresh. I'm going to hit F5, and I'm going to refresh. And now when I drop down, okay, cool. I can actually see my branch, which again is nothing more than a copy of a copy, right? It just means that in the process and only within my repository, this isn't going to be visible in anyone else's repository who has forked this as well. If someone else forked the Power Platform samples repository, they're not going to see the branch that I've created in my account. It only lives in my account. Okay, so you don't have to worry about anybody else seeing it. This is open source, so they could go to your account and see it, but it isn't going to show up in anybody else's. So if you're working as a team and you each create branches, you're not going to see each other's right away. But I am now in it, and it is a copy of a copy, right? So I've just copied main and put that into sharing is caring. All right, so we're moving right along. We're trucking right along. You'll also notice it says that the branch is up to date. So that means that I've got a current copy of everything. I am even with main, which is even with production. It's important to note, we'll get to that later for when you are after you've made your first contribution. It's important to note that you want to keep your branch and your repo, forked repo, in sync. And we'll show a tip on how to make sure that happens at the end. All right, so now let's take a look around. We see that we've got a samples folder. We see that we've got some samples in here. So ideally, this is where I would like to put my calendar component. If I go back to my folder, we see I've got this calendar component here. I would like that to live here inside of that particular folder. And then once I put it there, it's going to live in my account in that folder, and then I want to send it up into production. So what is the process for all of that? Let's go back to the root of our repo. Now, there's a few ways that that can happen. There's a few ways that that can happen. If you click on the code button here, you've got a few different options on which you can interact with your repo. The first one is the GitHub CLI. And you would use this command to do what's called cloning. Cloning is when it's going to take a copy of it out of the cloud and put it onto your machine. To do that, though, you have to install a little additional software, Git. GitHub is really just a superset working on top of what is actually called Git. And so you have to install Git, and you'd have to work with the CLI, which not everyone is a fan of. Not everyone's wanting to work in what feels like DOS or the command prompt. And so you may not love that idea, and it's understandable. And it's okay. You don't even have to. We'll show you an even cooler way. If you're on Windows, another option is the GitHub Desktop. This is a Windows application that you can download and you can install onto your machine, and then it allows you to interact with GitHub through a full graphical user interface, feature-rich application. The challenge is that there's a lot going on in that application, and it can be a little bit overwhelming at times because it wants to give you the tools you need to do everything, even administrate pull requests, meaning that if you wanted to go in and approve pull requests for a repo that you had administrative rights to, you could do that. So because it gives you the kitchen sink, it becomes a little bit overwhelming to utilize that software sometimes. But we're just getting started, so we really want to stick to the basics. So if we're not going to use GitHub Desktop and we're not going to use the CLI, what are we left with? What options do we have? This is where one of the coolest features comes into play for GitHub. Remember, GitHub was bought by Microsoft, which means that you'd think it's got some sort of cool interaction with Microsoft technologies that might actually allow us to contribute. Well, you'd be right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the period key on my keyboard. Yep, that period key that you put at the end of every sentence when you write anything in the world. I'm going to hit that period key. Watch what happens on my screen when I do that. It just flushed by, it said setting up web editor. But now what has happened is I'm in a browser, but it looks like I'm in VS Code, Visual Studio Code, which is a Windows application, but I'm in a browser. Great Scott, what just happened? Well, VS Code has a web version that is associated to GitHub that allows you to interact with your files as if you were connected in the desktop application. Holy cow, what just happened? All right, hopefully I blew someone's mind and they didn't know this existed. Usually there's always someone. When I first saw it, it blew my mind for sure. What just happened? Well, let me back up. We're gonna go back to github.com. there is a listener on GitHub that listens for the key period, for the period key. But what actually happened is it's just changing the URL from github.com to github.dev. So let me actually just type that in. Instead of hitting the period key, I'm just going to type in github.dev, and bam, it's taken me back into that location. Pretty slick. And now I'm able to actually look at all of the files that are here within a VS Code experience, and there's even more benefits. One is that we can tell I'm inside of my branch down here. So there's some contextual landscape awareness for us. And I would like to now take my files and put them up into here, into the samples folder right here. Well, is it possible that this whimsical, amazing interface of VS Code is going to allow me to drag and drop files, in fact, an entire solution full of files into my repo just by way of the browser? You betcha. So I'm gonna click on my calendar component. I'm gonna come over here. I'm highlighting samples. In fact, if I wasn't highlighting samples, watch, I'll close that. I'll come back and I will hover over it. It's gonna open it up, which is pretty cool. And I'm just gonna drop. And now what's happened, it opened up Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris must know something about us. It's added our calendar component, and there's a few different things that happened. Okay, so first of all, it added some letters here. You're gonna see a variety of letters when you start working with GitHub. They're representative of what that file's state is. In this case, they're brand new. So the A stands for add. We just added these files in. We also see that there is a number that was added here. That is the source code icon. We're going to go to that in a moment. But what it's telling us is that 31 files have been added. And that's kind of a great thing to know, because what we can do is, just as a quick reference point at this stage of our contribution, it's good to know if things are going right. So I can actually come back over to my solution. I can go to properties, and I can see it contains 31 files. Okay, cool. Things are going good so far. We've got 31 files. We've dropped them into our samples folder within the browser for VS Code for our repository, but we're still not done. We've added them, but this is just living in a little temporary space inside of our browser. So we actually need to do what's called a commit. Well, what is a commit? Let's tackle that together. We're going to go over to our source control button where those numbers live there, and we're going to see all of our files have been added. Of course, it's just looking at a flat view right now, so we could change that by selecting the little tree view icon. If I do that, then it gives us a more tree view look at all of our files. And I can just condense that. And so now we see, all right, yeah, this is looking good. I go back to my folder where my solution is at. Look in there. All right, asset solution, readme. Yep, things are looking accurate. And so this is feeling right. So now we see there's a button that says commit and push. Well, what is commit? Commit is just a fancy way of saying save. Instead of it just living temporarily in the browser, it's really just there in the browser. If I were to go back to my repo through github.com, these files don't yet exist in my repo. So I need to do what's called committing, or saving them to my repo. So commit and push means that we're going to save the files, and push means we're going to send them up into our repo. All right, so I'm just going to add a little comment here. It says calendar component, and I'm going to hit commit and push. You could alternatively also select the little checkbox there. Usually there's always a few different ways to accomplish any one thing within GitHub. It comes down to what you're comfortable with. So you get used to, usually via muscle memory, a specific path for yourself, and that's okay. Either one of these is good to go. So I'm going to click commit and push, and you see it even tells you your changes will be committed and pushed directly to GitHub. So there we go. I'm going to click it. All right, the files went away. My little source control icon over there, the numbers went away. It simply means that everything went well. We got no errors. There was no alerts. We see no more numbers, which means that our solution has been added. So how do we confirm that? Well, there's a few different things. I can come in here and I can go click go to repository. So when you bring down that little hamburger menu, it does that, and I'm just going to do that because it opens up in a new tab. Now, when you do that, let's go take a look at that sample. When I go into samples, lo and behold, it's not there. Well, what happened? Well, GitHub sometimes tries to help, sometimes a little too much. And so when I clicked that go to repository, it was helpful in adding me to a new tab and taking me to my account. Everything looks right. I see them in my account. I see them in the rate repo, but I don't see my file. Well, notice it was a little too helpful. It took us to the main branch because that's the root default branch. Little did it know that we added it to that, and that's really where we wanted to go. So just keep an eye out for that. Sometimes GitHub is trying to be helpful and is a little too helpful. So if I click on that branch, I go to my sharing is caring branch. That's just remember a copy of a copy where my current contribution is living. And I go into samples. Well, now I see my calendar component has been added, nestled nicely right next to Chuck Norris. Thank you, Daniel. And we are ready to go. Now, one other little tidbit, as I'm looking at this view, there's a couple of ways to go back to the root of my repo. One is right here in the breadcrumbs. You'll notice that that's highlighted. I can click that as a link. Also in the breadcrumbs at the top. The reason I'm highlighting this is because it's GitHub being helpful again. If I click this at the top, this link at the top, I'll do that, and look what happened. Took me back to the root, but stuck me back in the main branch by default. Not exactly what I wanted. And that may be something that trips you up, because again, you think you're clicking going back to some context inside your branch. GitHub's trying to be a little too helpful. But if you click this one, as of the recording right now, this link will actually keep you within your branch and all will be well, right? So now I see I'm in my sharing is caring branch. Just a little tip for you. Okay, so now where are we at? We've added our solution. It is ready to go. We would like to send it up into production. But remember at the beginning, we talked about the fact that we don't really have any rights for this particular administrative parent repo. That is really where we want our files to end up so that the rest of the world can consume them and use them, and we can collaborate with others. But we have no administrative rights. So how do we do that? Well, GitHub is trying to be helpful again. You'll notice here there's a little yellow box that's been added where it says, hey, it had a recent push. Remember, push just means we added those files to our own particular repo here, our own private repo. And it's giving us a nice little button that says compare and pull request. Now, this is real helpful. We're going to cover what a pull request here is in a moment, because I always found it to be a confusing sort of backwards term when I first started. If you're doing your contributions and you commit and push to your own repo, and let's say you're doing this late at night, you're tired, you've finished your solution, you got it into your own private repo, and you go to bed and you're like, I'll submit it to production tomorrow. You wake up and you might find that that little helpful box is gone. Well, don't worry. It doesn't mean that there's a small finite window that you're able to only contribute within and submit it. This is GitHub looking at a recent change and trying to, again, be helpful, which it is, and that's great. But if you come back at a later time, it might be gone, and then you might think, what happened? Well, don't worry. That little contribute button is where you're able to access the pull request as well. So if I click on that, you'll see that it tells me the branch is one commit. We tackle that. Remember, that's just a save. Ahead, okay, I'm not sure what that means. And now we want to open a pull request. So let's go one by one. Commit, yep, we saved it to our repo. Ahead, what does it mean that it's ahead? Well, it simply means that we have a change in our repo, our own private personal account repo, that's not in production. So that means that we're ahead of production because we've made a change that production doesn't have. That's all it really means. And now the big dog, pull request. What exactly is a pull request? Well, think of it like this. We know that we can't contribute and force our files into production because we don't have administrative rights. So what we have to do is we have to request that the files are pulled from our account. It's kind of backwards from what we're typically used to. What we're typically used to doing, even within, whether you're on Mac OS and Finder or you're in Windows and Explorer, we're pushing files around, right? We're dragging and dropping, we're moving files, we're pushing them from one location to another, because we always have the ability to do that. We usually have administrative rights, or at least the ability to create folders and move files between them. We're pushing those files around. Well, because we don't have administrative rights in that parent or master repo, the main repo, like Power Platform samples, we don't have rights to push. What we do have is the ability to make a request that the administrators pull the files from our repo. Because right now, that sample is living in our own personal private repo. And so we're making a request to the administrators of the parental primary root repo to pull the files from our repo into production. It's kind of backwards than what we're typically used to, because usually we're, again, pushing things around. So don't let that confuse you. That's really what pull request means. It's just kind of swap-a-roo on what we typically think of from a perspective. We're just sending a request to the administrators to pull the files into production. That's what it means. So now let's click Open Pull Request. And we see what we're looking at is a little bit of a comparison. This can get another, scary GitHub moment where things look very confusing. Let's start at the top. What we're doing is we are comparing the files from our account to the root parental primary account, right? So here it's saying, I am pushing, you see that by that little arrow right there, files from my account in my branch that I created, and it's pushing it into the parental account in the main branch. And it even gives us a little bit of a helper here, able to merge. Well, what if I accidentally change that to, I don't know, docs, right? Well, now things don't quite look the same, right? The files and all of that are very different from the docs branch, because that is holding files for documentation, not samples. In fact, it sees that and it even tells us, can't automatically merge. You might want to take a look at this, right? Now, typically, which branch should we be pointing to or requesting our files be pulled into? Well, typically that's going to be included in the documentation. Many repos will have it preset for you as the default, but it's typically included in the documentation. So we see that we've got that. We're pointing from the branch we created, looks good, in our account, looks good, to the main branch in the parental repo, and of course to that account. Now we're going to skip over the documentation right here for a moment, and I'm just going to scroll down. This is another helpful checkpoint for you. We can see statistics around what it is that we're trying to contribute. The first one is how many commits? Well, we know we only made one commit, /save, right? We added all our files, we committed. If we made additional changes, we might see more than one here, but for now, we made one commit, 31 files changed. Fantastic. That's resonating with a check we made when we committed them. Remember how I looked in that folder and checked to see how many folders or how many files? We saw that in the source control icon, and now it's being validated and confirmed here on the pull request page. One contributor, and we see again 31 files changed. So that all looks good. Now, here inside of our pull request, we see some documentation. This documentation is very, very important. Now, we're not going to cover the full scope of it today because there's not enough time to go through it bit by bit. We do have another Sharing is Caring session which walks through the importance of this and what all of this means. Uses what's called Markdown. You'll notice that things look a little weird. It's using little brackets and some carets and all of that. And when I click on preview, it looks much cleaner. Things look much cleaner, but you may not be familiar with Markdown, and that's okay. But reading this documentation is very important because it allows who is administering the repo to see exactly what it is that you're submitting. And so we want to fill it out in totality when we go submit a sample. If you have any questions, reach out to the repo owners. In the case of Power Platform, it's April or Daniel or myself or Hugo Bernier. Absolutely reach out to us. We've got other folks that are helping now as well. And you can reach out and ask questions or join one of our other Sharing is Caring sessions. For today, though, I've created a template that we're going to use. I'm just going to go back here and I'm going to open that up. And it's just simply a template that we're using for this sharing is caring session. So I'm going to copy that, move it off screen, come back, and I'm going to just change the sample title to that, and I'll just do calendar component. And then as far as the body goes, I'm just going to erase all that and put in a simple body. When I preview, I'm saying it's a new sample, it's a Power Apps calendar component, and that is sufficient for this. If we were doing this as a real submission for production, we would absolutely want to follow all of the documentation, all of the requests, and fill it in its totality. And again, if you want to get a little bit more familiar with that process, we've got a general first-time contributor session for sharing is caring that you can join, as well as one that we are going to be recording as well, similar to this one. Okay, so now it looks like things are looking good. We've validated commits, files changed, contributor. We see that we're pointing at the right branch. We see that we filled in our template. We've got the title there. One little thing left to change is you'll notice, or not change, I should say, you'll notice that it has a little checkbox here called allow edits by maintainers. Sometimes this can be confusing. People think, oh, does that mean people are going to be able to change my source code? I'm going to uncheck that. When you do that, though, it prevents any of the administrators from making any changes whatsoever. So if you've accidentally submitted to the wrong branch, which happens, if you've accidentally included additional files, it happens. We will actually try to help you when it's submitted and we're administering it. But if this is unchecked, can't do it. It will have to send you a message, you'll have to make the changes, and it can be a laborious back and forth that takes longer than it really would be necessary to get your sample up into the gallery. We want to make sure that those samples are added as fast and efficiently as possible. So we're at the point now where we're going to click create pull request, but that clicking of that button can be scary because you think, what if I made a mistake that I'm not seeing? Am I going to mess something up? Am I going to break production? Is everybody going to laugh at me? No, don't worry about that. Nothing you do here, if a mistake is made, cannot be is unfixable. We can absolutely fix it. No problem at all. In fact, I've made mistakes. I remember the first time I submitted, it was a scary moment. Fortunately, things worked out. And then 2 weeks later, I made a submission and did it wrong. So don't worry. You're not going to get made fun of. It's not going to be anything that you're going to break. It's something that we do together and we learn through together. And so we're imperfect humans. Mistakes happen. Don't let it stress you out. This button click here is the path to success. So we're ready to go. I'm going to click create pull request. And now what's happened is it's opened up a brand new pull request for me. I can see that here. It says it's open. If I open up pull requests here, I'm going to do that in a new tab. We see that it says that it was added. It's going through a task of checking. And now what's going to happen behind the scenes here is April, or an administrator, we're accelerating this for the purpose of this live stream, but she's going to go in and take a look at it. She's going to give me a little message likely that says, thank you. Oh, and there you go. Looks good, Pop Warner. Thanks for your contribution. How awesome is that, right? So the page automatically refreshes. And what she's also doing behind the scenes is she's probably merging. What that means, what merge means, is it just means that it was added to the actual primary repository. And there you go. There you go. Done and done. Now, it doesn't always happen that fast, everybody, so don't expect that kind of a processing to occur, but we wanted to show you end to end here, and that is the process. So if I were to go over to code in production, open this up in a new window, and open up samples, you can see now I'm in production, right? There's calendar component. There it is. Boom. Of course, we'll delete this here because it's not a real contribution. That's actually April's, so I'm not taking credit for anything. But what has happened is that is now done. Now, we talked about some housekeeping that might happen. If there are issues that we have to ask you about, that communication can happen here. And so you're absolutely going to get tagged. We'll let you know when it's been completed. Well, thank you. In fact, we would love you to actually demo it on a community call. So we might ask you for that. We'd like you to sign up for the recognition program, which we'll talk about in a few moments. But you do want to do some housekeeping on your end. And GitHub tries its best to actually remind you of that. So keep in mind, when you have contributed, and your pull request has been approved, right? It means that April has come in and she has pulled those files out of my account, out of my repo, into production. So now, because they have been pulled into production, I can actually delete that branch. And it even offers me that opportunity. You'll see, it says you're all set. The Warner Digital Sharing is Caring branch can be safely deleted. If you wish, you can also delete the fork of this repo. So what's the difference? Let's talk about that. Deleting the branch will simply just delete the branch. But what it leaves is a copy of the Power Platform Samples repository in my account. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because in the future, let's say we fast forward, I don't know, a month or two, or a few weeks, or maybe just a few days. When I go to submit my new sample, I need to fork again. But if I fork and I've already got a copy of it, it's not going to give me all the newest changes, right? So if I come in here, and let's close some windows here, and I'm now in the root, and I click fork, it actually tells me, hey, there's no available destinations because I've already got one. I've already created a fork. So it's not getting a brand new copy. And in fact, you'll notice when I go in and say, yeah, cool, go to that, it tells me I'm behind, 2 commits behind. There's something that's changed in the primary master repo since I've last contributed, and I'm now behind. But I just forked. Why am I behind? Well, GitHub does not know if I've made additional changes within my own account and is not going to just overwrite them. So there's a few ways in which we can bring them together or sync them up. You could always do it via a command line interface. You can also use the sync fork option. And I will caution, this is not always a fix all for everything. Oftentimes it may be branch specific, it may not be repository specific, but GitHub is always making improvements. So what we found is that utilizing the update branch might not always be the best way, because what if there are other branches that we need access to? Well, that can be problematic. So you'll remember what GitHub told us was that if we want to delete the fork, we can do that. That is bar none the absolute safest way to ensure you are always going to get a brand new fork the next time you are ready to contribute. In fact, it even gives us a little helper. So if I click settings, it takes me into settings. And remember, I was in the primary repo when I did that. I was in P&P, Power Platform Samples. And so when I clicked, let me refresh that. There we go. When I click settings, it's moved me into my account. Because again, you may think, well, wait a second, I'm in settings, I'm going to delete. How do I know I'm not deleting production? Remember, you can't because we don't have administrative rights. So I'm in settings, and I can confirm that I'm in my account by looking at the URL or the header. If I scroll all the way to the bottom, we come to the Top Gun, Tom Cruise Danger Zone, and we've got the ability to delete this repository. Now, if we delete it, that means that next time we go to submit a contribution and we fork the repo, we will get a brand new fresh copy. So make this part of your ritual. Make it part of after your contribution has been submitted, merged, and approved, and the pull request has been completed, come in and delete the repository with one note to keep in mind. If you have any existing PRs in place, meaning that if you decided to do multiple pull requests at once and only one of them has been approved, the other one is still waiting to be pulled in, you do not want to delete your repository. Only delete once all of your pull requests have been completed and there's no outstanding pull requests. Because remember, it's living. Those files are living in your repository. So you absolutely want to make sure that if you are deleting it, that would sever the ability for the parent repository to pull those files in. You've deleted them, they're gone. So only delete the repository once all of your pull requests have been completed. In this case, we've only done one, we're good to go. So I'm going to click delete this repository. GitHub, being the helpful partner that it is, says, hey, you want to delete it? Yep, I want to delete this repository. Unexpected bad things will happen if you don't read this. Yep, okay, I get it, I've read, I understand the effects. It's kind of like saying, did you mean that? Did you really, really mean that? I have read, I understand the effects, and now they're saying, did you really, really, really mean that? Because what they want us to do is type in the name of our repository to validate and confirm we do want to delete it. So I'm going to do that. In fact, you could always just copy and paste. But this is a way that we're confirming, yeah, okay, we're not accidentally doing this in some other repo. We're validating, I absolutely want to get rid of this repo inside of my account. Delete this repository. And now it wants me to validate. There we go. Bam. We see repository has been successfully deleted. And if I were to go back to PNP and Power Platform samples, that's the root, I can now fork a fresh copy. And when I click that, it takes us back to the original forking mechanism and screen that we were used to. All right. Whew. We have covered a lot, everybody, in a short amount of time. So what's next? April? Welcome.
Yeah, that that was amazing. You always it blows me away how well you're able to explain all the complexities of GitHub. So that was really great. Lots of comments in the chat with everyone. Just excited about that. I did have a question before we move on to what's next from the audience that I wanted to highlight. A lot of people is their first time seeing the GitHub.dev that you showed for
Yes.
submitting your samples. One person asked, "Is there any cost associated with that, with using that?"
If there is, then I owe someone a lot of money and I don't even know about it. So I don't think so. No cost. It is literally just part of the GitHub mechanism, as far as I'm aware. There's no cost. I pay no premium. Excuse me. I pay no premium in GitHub on this account, and so it absolutely is free, as far as I know. So no premium licenses or anything like that. Just take advantage of it.
Perfect. All right. So what's next? You mentioned a few times, David, that we have another Power Platform Samples contributor session coming up. That's a little bit better for a deep dive.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've done today is very much a you listen to me, which is great. We can get it on recording and you can reference it later. But if you would like to work hand in hand, our Sharing is Caring sessions are actually live, hands-on in a Teams call. It is handled by Teams webinar, which is a cool feature. So if you were to come over to our Sharing is Caring site and you click on register, it actually uses Teams webinar and you're able to just instantly register. It is coming up on October 11th, which is right after the Power Platform Conference. So you go in, you fill in your name and address. You'll get an instant calendar invite. You'll get reminders as it's coming up, and we're trying to get those scheduled every single month. So absolutely, come join that. It's live. It is not recorded. It is a safe space. We know that sometimes when you get in these environments that are being recorded, you think, should I ask that question? Doesn't everybody know that? I've done it. I still do it. It's nerve-wracking, but they're not recorded so that you can feel safe to ask any and all questions you want.
Yeah, those really great to join. Completely interactive, so you get to walk through real time. So definitely encourage you if you want a little bit more interactive, hands-on, and in the safe space, like David mentioned, to take advantage of those. Now, if people do contribute, David, what do we have in place kind of to help with that? Or do we have a way to recognize them?
Yeah, we absolutely do. We've got our community recognition program. Now, what's cool and unique about this is it's not just a shout out on a community call. It is a formal and official and accredited recognition. We use Credly, the same Credly that used to be used for certification badges. These badges, these community badges, are absolutely free. They're added to your Credly account, which means that you can associate them to your LinkedIn profile. You can add them to Twitter, add them to your blogs. Again, it's showing that you are making a difference above and beyond others by contributing to the community. There's no cost associated to it. We in the community cover all of the costs, and so we invite everyone to join. You just need to opt in once. You provide your GitHub account, and we've got all kinds of badges. We've got some fun new thematic badges coming up for Hacktoberfest, as well as, of course, our pumpkin spice. A lot of commits, and everybody knows what commits are now. So you're out, go out there and make a lot of commits and get that badge. And we've got more coming up the end of the year. So it's a really fun way to get recognized. No cost. Opt in today.
Yeah, I love those themes badges. Definitely going to get me the pumpkin spice one, and Hacktoberfest is always good for sure. So a lot of people are already asking, they're jumping ahead. So how do we contribute? How can we get that link to the community recognition and to join Sharing is Caring? So what can we do to learn more here?
Tell everybody and anybody who you think will benefit. So we ask you to do that. Tweet. Feel free to tag April and myself. We'll help amplify it. Let them know that you had a wonderful session today and you enjoyed learning. Maybe, again, you saw that usability of VS Code in the browser, which blew my mind the first time. Why do we ask that you share? Because as much as April and I can stand on the rooftops and scream for people to come join and learn in these sessions, you have an audience we don't. You're a trusted confidant in your network, and so they will listen to you. And if you enjoyed it, they will enjoy it. So let others know. Let them know. Come join. Check out ak.ms/community/home, by which you can go to the Sharing is Caring page, or go directly there to ak.ms/sharing-is-caring, and let others know. We absolutely want to benefit and provide the benefit to everybody in the community that wants to get more involved.
Absolutely. And, timing wise, if you happen to be in Vegas next week for the Power Platform Conference, David, myself, Hugo, and Daniel will all be there. And we'll be doing a session all about a lot of the stuff that we talked about today and community in general and how to get started and different ways to get plugged in. So if you'll be there, definitely encourage you to check that one out if you want to learn more about all of that. So it's the second annual conference that's starting next week. Cool. And just a few more housekeeping things here. We are wrapping up our hackathon, believe it or not. It's been a great couple, 2.5 weeks here. So we're going to have one more live session to close it all out this Thursday. So that'll actually be with Steven Siciliano, who's the VP of Power Automate. He's going to be doing a little mini keynote, but then we'll reserve a lot of time for a Q&A with Steven. So this is really good if you've accumulated a lot of questions throughout the hack as you started building applications, to get all of your questions answered from Steven in that session there. So definitely encourage you to check that out. It's a really good ending for that. And as a reminder, your submissions are due by 11:59 p.m. Pacific on this Thursday, September 28th. So you still have a little while. A few other links here too. If you want to get informed, there is still time to register. So if you haven't registered, you have a few days to kind of get your stuff in order here and get your hack ready. So you can go to aka.ms/pp/hacktogether to get all the info, including a link there to register. Also, we have our discussion forum. So if you get stuck with anything and you need us to help answer questions, that's the place to go. Or if you just want to share what you're building and get some feedback. Another thing I wanted to mention too is we didn't talk about it today, but another way that you can contribute is through our prompt library. So in the hackathon, you're probably using a lot of our Copilots, or maybe you're using Azure OpenAI or things like that, and you're using some prompts to get what you want out of AI. We have a prompt library at aka.ms/power platform prompts, where you can share all of those prompts. It's a little bit easier because you're just sharing basically a text file with your prompt in there, and then that gives the ability for anyone to copy and paste that and use that in their tools, and that'll be a really good resource there to have, and a very easy way to contribute as well. So definitely check that out. And of course, there's a link at the bottom for you to submit your sessions. So with that, we really thank you all for joining the session. And thank you, David, for that amazing overview of GitHub and helping us all get started and on our path to contributing to the community. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Team effort, always enjoyable doing this. So get out there and contribute, everybody.
Yep. Happy contributing and happy hacking. Can't wait to see what you all build. And we'll see you in the closing session on Thursday. Thank you, everyone.